In the vast darkness of space, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a universal truth that every species learns too late. Never underestimate the quiet ones. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered 17 star systems, enslaved 43 different species, and declared themselves the undisputed masters of the galaxy. Their victory celebrations echoed across 1,000 worlds as they planted their banners on the smoking ruins of the last resistance stronghold. But in a forgotten corner of the galaxy, on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, something stirred in the shadows. The inhabitants of this world have been watching, learning, and preparing. They called themselves humans, and they came from a place the galaxy would soon learn to fear, a death world where evolution had forged them in the crucible of endless conflict, natural disasters, and the kind of relentless survival that would make even the most hardened warrior species weep. The Zephyrians had made one critical mistake. They had assumed their conquest was complete. They had never encountered the humans. They had no idea that their greatest nightmare was about to begin with a simple transmission that would echo across the galaxy. This is Earth. We've been expecting you. What happens when an empire built on fear meets a species that has spent millennia perfecting the art of war? What occurs when beings who consider themselves apex predators encounter creatures who evolve alongside actual apex predators and somehow manage to dominate them all? The galaxy was about to find out, and the Zephyrians were about to learn why some worlds are left alone. Not because they're weak, but because they're too dangerous to disturb. The war they thought they had won was about to become their extinction. Admiral Alexaros stood before the massive holographic display aboard the Zephyrian flagship Eternal Dominion, watching the final resistance pocket on Kepler 442b burn beneath orbital bombardment. The purple-skinned warriors' 4 eyes gleamed with satisfaction as another world fell under their empire's iron grip. This was their 47th conquest in less than a standard galactic year, and each victory had been easier than the last. "Admiral, the final defensive positions have been neutralized," reported Commander Veltar from his station. His voice carried the typical Zephyrian mixture of pride and casual cruelty that had become their species' trademark across the galaxy. "The Kalari resistance has been completely eliminated." ZYXteron nodded approvingly. The Kalari had been fierce fighters, their crystalline exoskeletons providing natural armor that had given the Empire's forces some trouble initially. But like every other species they had encountered, the Kalari had possessed a fatal weakness. They fought with honor, following predictable tactical doctrines, and refusing to employ what they considered barbaric warfare methods. The Zephyrians had no such limitations. Their philosophy was simple: victory at any cost. They had perfected the art of psychological warfare, using terror as effectively as their plasma weapons. When facing a new enemy, they would capture civilians from conquered territories and broadcast their slow, methodical torture across all communication channels. Most species surrendered within days rather than watch their own kind suffer such fates. "Begin the harvesting operations," ZYXTERA commanded. "Standard protocol. Separate the useful specimens from the livestock. The strong ones will serve as laborers in the outer rim mines. The intelligent ones will become our servants, and the rest can feed our war machine." This was how the Zephyrian Empire had grown so rapidly. They didn't simply conquer worlds, they consumed them entirely. Every resource, every life form, every scrap of useful material was cataloged and repurposed for the Empire's expansion. It was an efficient system that had allowed them to maintain their rapid conquest pace while keeping their supply lines well-stocked. As the holographic display shifted to show the systematic processing of Kalari survivors, a new signal appeared on the communications array. Lieutenant KYXVEL looked puzzled as she examined the incoming transmission. "Admiral, we're receiving a communication from an uncharted system. Coordinates suggest it's from the outer spiral arm, approximately 30,000 light-years from our current position." ZYXTERA's antenna-like appendages twitched with interest. Uncharted systems meant untapped resources, and the outer spiral arm was known to contain some of the galaxy's richest mineral deposits. Display the transmission. The main screen flickered as a primitive-looking signal resolved into clarity. The being that appeared was unlike anything in their extensive xenological databases. It was bipedal, with pale skin covered by some kind of fabric, and possessed only two eyes positioned side by side in its head. Its hair was an unusual brown color, and its overall appearance was remarkably symmetrical. "Greetings," the being said in surprisingly clear galactic standard. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the United Earth Defense Force. We represent the human civilization of Sol 3, also known as Earth. We've been monitoring your expansion across the galaxy with great interest." Zhyxtra exchanged glances with his officers. The creature's calm demeanor was unusual. Most species either cowered in fear upon first contact with the Zephyrian Empire or attempted to project false bravado. This human displayed neither reaction. "We understand that you've recently completed your conquest of the Kalari homeworld," the human continued. "We wish to extend an invitation for diplomatic contact. We believe there may be opportunities for mutual benefit between our civilizations." Commander Veltar snorted in amusement. Another species is seeking to negotiate their surrender before we even arrive. How refreshingly efficient. But something in the human's expression troubled Zhyxtra. There is no fear in those alien eyes, no desperate hope that diplomacy might save them. Instead, there was something that looked almost like anticipation. "I am Admiral Zhyxtra of the Zephyrian Empire," he replied formally. "Your species is unknown to us. You will provide complete stellar cartography of your territory, full biological and technological specifications of your civilization, and immediate surrender of your military forces. Compliance will result in favorable placement in our labor allocation system." The human's facial features shifted slightly in what their xenologists would later identify as a smile. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Admiral. You see, we humans have a rather different perspective on concepts like surrender and compliance." Admiral Chun leaned forward slightly, and her expression became more serious. "We've been studying your empire's methods for some time now. Your tactics, your technology, your psychological warfare techniques. Very impressive, really. Quite effective against most civilizations." Zhyxtra's combat instincts began to activate. Something was wrong with this exchange. The human's confidence was too genuine, too unshakable. "You speak as though your opinion matters, creature. We have conquered 47 worlds. We have enslaved entire star systems. Your pathetic single-planet civilization cannot possibly pose any threat to the mighty Zephyrian Empire." "Single planet?" The human laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both musical and unsettling. "Oh, Admiral, you've made your first mistake. Earth isn't just our homeworld, it's our training ground." The transmission shifted to show vast fleets of ships unlike anything in Zephyrian databases. The vessels were darker, more angular than typical galactic designs, with weapon configurations that suggested a fundamentally different approach to space combat. But more disturbing was the sheer number of them. The display showed hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands of ships spread across multiple star systems. "You see," Admiral Chun continued conversationally, "while you've been busy conquering civilizations that fight like civilizations, we've been preparing for war like humans. There's a significant difference." Zhyxtra's four eyes narrowed. "What difference could your primitive species possibly make? We have technology beyond your comprehension, weapons that can shatter planets, strategies refined over millennia of conquest. And we have something you've never encountered before," the human replied. "We have experience fighting ourselves." The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Around the bridge, Zephyrian officers exchanged uncertain glances. Fighting their own species was virtually unheard of among galactic civilizations. Most developed beyond such barbarism long before achieving space travel. Admiral Chen seemed to read their confusion. "You wonder how this is possible?" Let me educate you about human history, Admiral. We've been at war for our entire recorded existence. Not just with other species, not just with our environment, but with each other. We've perfected every form of conflict you can imagine, and quite a few you probably can't. The display shifted again, showing what appeared to be historical footage from the human homeworld. Massive armies clashing across varied terrain, aerial battles involving primitive aircraft, naval engagements between enormous sea vessels, and, finally, weapons that could level entire cities in blinding flashes of light. We fought wars with rocks and sticks, with bronze and iron, with gunpowder and chemistry, with nuclear fire and guided missiles, Chun continued. We fought in deserts and jungles, across oceans, and in mountain ranges, in the bitter cold of Arctic wastelands, and the crushing heat of tropical swamps. We've fought for territory, for resources, for ideologies, for religions, and sometimes just because we were bored. Commander Veltar stammered. That's impossible. No species could survive such constant warfare. You're right, the human agreed. Most species couldn't. But humans didn't just survive it, we thrived on it. Every war taught us new lessons. Every defeat made us stronger. Every victory showed us better ways to win the next conflict. Zhuangxia felt a chill run down his spine, an emotion he hadn't experienced since his days as a junior officer. What are you saying? I'm saying that while you've been perfecting the art of conquering civilized species, we've been perfecting the art of unconquered warfare. You use terror as a weapon? We invented terror. You employ psychological warfare? We wrote the manual. You think you're efficient killers? Admiral, we turned killing into an art form, so refined that we had to make rules to limit how effectively we could destroy each other. The transmission showed images of massive structures filled with weapons, training facilities where humans practice combat in every conceivable environment, and research centers developing technologies specifically designed for warfare. But here's the most important difference between us and every species you've conquered, Admiral Chin said, her voice taking on an almost friendly tone. They fought to defend their homes, their families, their way of life. Noble causes, certainly, but ultimately defensive motivations. She paused, and when she continued, her words carried a weight that seemed to press against the very fabric of space itself. We fight because we're good at it. And, Admiral Zhuangxia, we're very, very good at it. The transmission cut to show a single human ship approaching the edge of Kalari space. It was smaller than most Zephyrian vessels, with unusual angular designs and weapon ports that seemed to cover every surface. That ship contains one human crew, Chen explained. 12 individuals. They volunteered for what we call a reconnaissance mission. They're going to see exactly what you've done to the Kalari homeworld. ZYXThara's tactical mind immediately began calculating. One small ship against an entire fleet? It was suicide. Your sacrifice is noted, but meaningless. One vessel cannot threaten our armada. You still don't understand, the humans said softly. They're not there to threaten your armada, Admiral. They're there to make sure we remember exactly why we're going to hunt down every single Zephyrian in this galaxy. Before ZYXThara could respond, his communications officer shouted in alarm. Admiral, the human vessel just entered our perimeter. It's not responding to our hail, and it's moving unlike anything in our tactical databases. The bridge screens lit up with tracking data as the human ship performed maneuvers that should have been impossible. It moved through the Zephyrian formation like a predator through a herd, its weapons firing with precision that suggested an intimate knowledge of Zephyrian ship designs. How are they targeting our weak points? Veltar demanded. Those structural vulnerabilities are classified Imperial secrets. Admiral Chen's voice came through clearly despite the chaos beginning to erupt around them. We told you, Admiral. We've been watching, learning, preparing. The human ship didn't try to engage the entire fleet. Instead, it focused on specific targets, communication relays, sensor arrays, and command vessels. Each attack was surgical, devastating, and clearly designed to cripple rather than destroy. They're not trying to win, HFY realized aloud. They're gathering intelligence. Very good, Chin approved. You're learning. That ship will return to Earth with complete tactical analysis of your fleet composition, weapon capabilities, and combat doctrine. We'll study it, improve our own systems, and develop countermeasures for everything you could deploy against us. The human vessel completed its reconnaissance run and vanished into hyperspace before the Zephyrian fleet could mount an effective response. In its wake, it left 12 disabled ships and a communication network that would take days to fully repair. This is our formal declaration, Admiral Chan announced as the transmission prepared to end. The Zephyrian Empire's expansion ends here. You will release all enslaved populations, return to your home territory, and prepare for the consequences of your actions. HFY's rage finally overcame his growing uncertainty. You dare threaten the Zephyrian Empire with a single ship and primitive technology? We will burn your pathetic world to ashes. You're welcome to try, the human replied with that unsettling smile. But, Admiral, you should know something about humans before you make that decision. The transmission showed one final image. Earth itself, a blue and green world that looked deceptively peaceful from space. But the data overlays revealed the truth. The planet's surface was covered with defensive installations, orbital platforms, and what appear to be millions of launch tubes pointing toward space. This world has been at war for so long that we've forgotten what peace actually looks like, Chen said quietly. Every human on this planet has been preparing for this moment their entire lives. We've built our entire civilization around the assumption that someday something would come from the stars to threaten us. Her voice carried absolute certainty as she delivered her final words. Admiral, you've just given us the war we've been waiting for our whole existence. And we've had 300,000 years to get ready for it. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Eternal Dominion in stunned silence. Around them, damage reports continued to stream in from the human reconnaissance attack, but HFY barely heard them. For the first time in his military career, Admiral HFY experienced something completely foreign to his nature, doubt. These humans had just accomplished something no species had ever managed. They had made the Zephyrian Empire feel vulnerable. As he stared at the tactical display showing Earth's location, one thought echoed through his mind. What kind of species prepares for war against enemies they've never met? He was about to find out. 3 weeks after the human transmission, Admiral HFY stood in the war room of the Zephyrian High Command, facing the most powerful beings in the Empire. The chamber itself was a monument to Zephyrian supremacy, its walls decorated with the preserved remains of defeated enemy leaders and holographic displays showing their conquered territories across the galaxy. Emperor Kralvex, ancient ruler of the Zephyrian Empire, studied the tactical reports with his 6 eyes while his massive frame remained perfectly still. At over 3 meters tall and possessing natural armor plating that had deflected assassination attempts for centuries, he was the living embodiment of Zephyrian power. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You allowed a single alien vessel to penetrate our fleet formation, gather intelligence, and escape without significant damage, the Emperor stated flatly. Explain. HFY had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but facing the Emperor's displeasure was like standing in front of a natural disaster. Your Imperial Majesty, the human vessel employed technologies and tactics completely outside our tactical doctrine. Their ship moved with impossible acceleration. Their weapons targeted vulnerabilities we didn't know existed in our own designs, and their combat algorithms seemed to predict our responses before we made them. War Minister Kindar, a scarred veteran of dozens of campaigns, leaned forward aggressively. You're telling us that this primitive species from an uncharted world has superior technology to the mighty Zephyrian Empire? Not superior, excellence, HFY clarified carefully. Different. They approach the engagement with completely alien tactical thinking. While our weapons are more powerful and our ships larger, they seem to understand exactly how we would use them. The Emperor's attention shifted to the intelligence reports flowing in from across the galaxy. What has our surveillance network discovered about this Earth? Intelligence Director Vexnala activated a holographic display showing the Sol system. Your Majesty, our deep space monitors have been analyzing electromagnetic signatures from the human homeworld. What we've discovered is troubling. The display zoomed in on Earth, revealing a planet that looked nothing like the peaceful world Admiral Chun had shown them. The surface was covered with geometric patterns that intelligence analysis suggested were defensive positions. Orbital space was crowded with what appeared to be weapons platforms, and the electromagnetic spectrum around the planet indicated massive industrial operations. How many humans inhabit this world? Emperor Kralvex asked. Approximately 8 billion, Your Majesty, Vexnala reported. But that's where the situation becomes concerning. Our analysis suggests that at least 90% of their industrial capacity is dedicated to military production. Minister Dar laughed harshly. Impossible. No civilization can sustain that level of militarization without economic collapse. Under normal circumstances, you would be correct, Excellence, the intelligence director agreed. However, the humans appear to have structured their entire society around warfare preparation. They call it their military-industrial complex, and it's been their primary economic driver for centuries. The holographic display shifted to show human cities, revealing urban centers that looked more like fortified military bases than civilian settlements. Every building seemed designed with defensive considerations, every street laid out to channel invading forces into killing zones. They've turned their entire homeworld into a fortress, Vexnala continued. But more disturbing is evidence that this isn't a recent development. Archaeological analysis suggests they've been fortifying Earth for hundreds of their local years. Emperor Kralvex's expression grew thoughtful. You're suggesting they've been preparing for galactic contact? More than that, Your Majesty. They appear to have been preparing for galactic warfare. Our xenological analysis indicates that humans have no natural predators on their homeworld, yet they've developed the most sophisticated military technologies we've ever encountered. They created these weapons to fight each other. The war room fell silent as the implications sank in. A species that had reached the stars while simultaneously maintaining constant warfare with itself was unprecedented in galactic history. Admiral Zoyextara cleared his throat carefully. Your Majesty, there's additional intelligence that may be relevant. Our communication intercepts suggest that the humans have been aware of our expansion for some time. They've been monitoring our conquest patterns and developing countermeasures. How long? The Emperor demanded. Possibly decades, Your Majesty. They seem to have been intercepting our communications, analyzing our tactics, and preparing specific responses to our standard operating procedures. War Minister Kindar's four arms gestured dismissively. Preparation is meaningless against overwhelming force. We command fleets numbering in the millions of vessels. Their pathetic system contains perhaps a few thousand ships at most. Intelligence Director Vexnala activated another display. Excellence, that assumption may be incorrect. Our latest surveillance data suggests the humans have constructed what they call ghost fleets, vessels that remain powered down and hidden throughout their outer system. Conservative estimates place their actual naval strength at approximately 50,000 combat-capable ships. Still vastly outnumbered, Kindar insisted. Yes, Excellence, but our tactical analysis indicates their ships are designed for asymmetric warfare rather than traditional fleet engagements. Each human vessel appears capable of operating independently for extended periods, using hit-and-run tactics rather than seeking decisive battle. Emperor Kralvex studied the data with growing interest. Show me their military leadership. The display shifted to show intelligence profiles of human military commanders. Unlike the hereditary officer class common to most galactic civilizations, human leaders seem to be selected based purely on competence and experience. Their command structure is highly unusual, Vexnala explained. Rather than noble bloodlines or political appointment, humans promote military leaders based on combat effectiveness. Admiral Sarah Chun, who delivered their ultimatum, rose through their ranks by demonstrating tactical brilliance in what they call war games, simulated battles against other human forces. They practice warfare against themselves? War Minister Kindar asked incredulously. Constantly, Excellence. They've created an entire industry around military simulation, training their officers in scenarios that include fighting opponents using their own tactics and technologies. They don't just prepare to fight aliens, Your Majesty. They prepare to fight themselves. Admiral Zoyaxthara felt obligated to add his own observations. Your Majesty, during my encounter with Admiral Chun, she demonstrated knowledge of our tactical doctrines that shouldn't have been possible. She knew our fleet compositions, our standard engagement patterns, even our psychological warfare techniques. How detailed was their intelligence? Complete, Your Majesty. They knew things about our operations that some of our own officers don't know. Emperor Kralvex was quiet for several minutes, processing the information. Finally, he turned to his war minister. Kindar, prepare our response. I want a full battle fleet assembled for the human system. If these creatures want war, we'll give them the full might of the Zephyrian Empire. How many ships, Your Majesty? All of them, the Emperor declared. Every vessel we can muster. If the humans have been preparing for galactic warfare, then we'll show them what galactic warfare truly means. As the senior staff began implementing the Emperor's orders, Admiral Zoyaxthara remained troubled by something Admiral Chun had said during their confrontation. The humans weren't just confident, they were eager. No species should welcome war with the Zephyrian Empire, yet the humans seemed to be looking forward to it. Meanwhile, 300,000 light-years away, Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the command center of the United Earth Defense Force, watching real-time intelligence reports from Zephyrian space. Around her, the most brilliant military minds humanity had ever produced worked with quiet efficiency to finalize their preparations. Admiral, our intelligence assets confirm that Emperor Kralvex has ordered a full mobilization, reported Commander Marcus Torres, Chin's chief intelligence officer. They're pulling ships from across their empire. Current estimates suggest they'll bring between 8 and 12 million vessels to Seoul. Chin nodded approvingly. Perfect. Exactly what we expected. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the architect of humanity's defensive strategy, looked up from her tactical displays. Are you certain we can handle those numbers, Admiral? Even with all our preparations, that's still overwhelming force. Elena, you're still thinking like a conventional military strategist, Chin replied with a smile. The Zephyrians are bringing their entire fleet to fight us here, in our home system, using tactics we've been studying for decades. She gestured to the holographic display showing Earth's defensive network. They expect a traditional space battle. They're planning to overwhelm us with superior numbers and firepower, just like they've done with every other species. Commander Torres understood first. But we're not going to give them a traditional space battle. Exactly. We're going to give them something no Zephyrian military commander has ever experienced, a human war. Dr. Vasquez activated the master tactical display, showing not just Earth's obvious defenses, but the hidden preparations that have been decades in the making. The asteroid belt had been seeded with automated weapons platforms. Jupiter's moons had been converted into massive military bases. Even the outer planets served as staging areas for defensive systems. Phase 1 will begin the moment their fleet enters our system, Chen explained. They'll encounter what appears to be a conventional defensive perimeter around Earth. They'll deploy in standard formation, expecting us to meet them in traditional fleet combat. The display showed simulated Zephyrian vessels arranging themselves in the precise patterns their tactical doctrine demanded. That's when we spring our first surprise. The defensive platforms they'll be targeting are actually decoys. The real defensive network has been hidden for years. Commander Torres pulled up the classified schematics. We've turned the entire solar system into a weapon, haven't we? The solar system is just the delivery mechanism, Dr. Vasquez corrected. The real weapons are the humans operating it. Admiral Chen's expression grew serious. Gentlemen, the Zephyrian Empire has conquered 47 worlds using the same basic strategy. Overwhelming force applied against civilizations that fight defensively. They've never faced an enemy that wants them to bring everything they have. She paused, looking out at the blue planet below them. Earth isn't just our homeworld. It's been our training ground for 300,000 years. Every human on this planet has ancestors who survived wars, plagues, natural disasters, and challenges that would have destroyed most species. Commander Torres reviewed the psychological profiles of human combat personnel. The Zephyrians use fear as a weapon. How do you terrorize a species that evolved alongside predators, survived ice ages, and spent millennia perfecting ways to kill each other? You don't, Chen replied simply. You just give them a target worthy of their full attention. The command center's main screen activated, showing incoming transmissions from human fleets positioned throughout known space. Not the visible ships the Zephyrians had detected, but the actual invasion force that had been moving into position for months. Admiral, all strike groups report ready for Phase 2, Commander Torres announced. The moment the Zephyrian fleet commits to Sol, we can begin simultaneous attacks on every major installation in their empire. Dr. Vasquez looked concerned. Admiral, are we certain about this strategy? We're essentially inviting them to attack our homeworld. Chen turned to face her senior staff, and, for a moment, the weight of command was visible in her expression. Elena, humanity has been preparing for this moment since the first time one of our ancestors looked up at the stars and wondered what might be looking back. She gestured toward Earth. This world has produced warriors who conquered continents with bronze weapons, strategists who coordinated global conflicts involving hundreds of millions of soldiers, and scientists who unlocked the fundamental forces of the universe, specifically to create better ways of destroying their enemies. Her voice carried absolute conviction. The Zephyrians think they're bringing a fleet to conquer Earth. What they're actually doing is bringing targets to the species that wrote the book on making targets disappear. Admiral Chun looked at each of her officers in turn. The Zephyrian Empire ends here, not because we're stronger than them, but because they've made the mistake of fighting humans on our terms. Outside the command center's viewports, Earth continued its ancient rotation, looking peaceful and vulnerable from space. But hidden beneath that deceptive calm, 8 billion humans were putting the finishing touches on plans that would soon teach the galaxy why some species are better left alone. The Zephyrians were coming to end a war they thought they had already won. They had no idea they were about to start a war they had already lost. The Zephyrian invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system like a dark tide washing across the stars. Admiral Ethra watched from the bridge of the Eternal Dominion as nearly 10 million vessels spread across a formation so vast it could have encompassed entire star systems. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history, representing the combined might of an empire that had never known defeat. Admiral, all fleet elements report ready, Commander Veltar announced. The humans appear to have deployed their defenses exactly as predicted. The tactical display showed Earth's defensive perimeter, several thousand human vessels arranged in traditional protective formations around their homeworld, with orbital weapons platforms providing supporting fire positions. It looked like every other desperate last stand the Zephyrian Empire had crushed during their expansion. Zhuaixtheros studied the human formations with growing confidence. They've positioned themselves defensively, just like every other species. Even with all their preparation, they're still thinking like prey animals instead of predators. Through the communication channels, Emperor Kralvex's voice reached every ship in the massive fleet. Warriors of the Empire, today we face an enemy that has dared to threaten our dominion. These humans believe their primitive world can stand against the might of 47 conquered civilizations. Show them the price of defying the Zephyrian Empire. The battle cry that echoed across 10 million ships should have been terrifying enough to break the spirit of any enemy force. Instead, the human response came as a single transmission broadcast on all frequencies. Zephyrian Fleet, this is Admiral Chun, the familiar human voice said calmly. Welcome to Seoul. We've been looking forward to this. ZYXTRA found himself disturbed by the complete absence of fear in the human commander's voice. Even species that fought bravely showed some recognition of the overwhelming odds they faced. Admiral Chun sounded like she was greeting expected guests. Human, ZYXTRA responded, you face the full military might of the Zephyrian Empire. Surrender now, and your deaths will be swift. Thank you for the offer, Chun replied politely, but we'll have to decline. You see, Admiral, you've just made a critical tactical error. We have overwhelming superiority in every category, ZYXTRA stated confidently. 10 million ships against your few thousand. How is that an error? You brought your entire fleet to our home system, Chun explained patiently. That means you've left every other world in your empire completely defenseless. Before ZYXTRA could process the implications of that statement, his communications officer began receiving reports from across Zephyrian space. The messages came in rapid succession, each one more alarming than the last. Admiral, we're receiving emergency transmissions from the Kalari system. They report human fleets attacking our garrison. Priority alert from the Nexus Prime shipyards. Human forces have bypassed our defensive perimeters. Admiral, the Zephyrian homeworld itself is under attack. Unknown human vessels are targeting our planetary defense network. ZYXTRA stared at the flood of incoming distress calls in disbelief. That's impossible. Our intelligence showed the humans had only thousands of ships. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos with deadly calm. Admiral, the ships you detected were our home fleet. The ones attacking your empire right now are our expeditionary forces. We've been positioning them throughout your territory for months. The tactical display updated to show the true scope of human operations. While the Zephyrian Empire had focused all their attention on the obvious threat of human ships in the Sol system, other human forces had infiltrated deep into Imperial space using stealth technologies and tactics the Zephyrians had never encountered. You see, Chun continued conversationally, while you were perfecting the art of conquering defensive civilizations, we were studying the art of conquering aggressive empires. The first rule is simple. When your enemy concentrates their forces, you attack everything they left behind. War Minister Kindar's voice crackled through the fleet communication network, transmitted from the distant imperial capital. Admiral ZYXTRA, you must return immediately. The humans are employing weapons and tactics that our defenses cannot counter. What weapons? ZYXTRA demanded. They're not just attacking our military targets, came Kindar's increasingly frantic report. They're systematically destroying our infrastructure, our supply networks, our communication hubs. They seem to understand our logistics better than we do. Admiral Chen's voice returned to the communication channel. We've been studying your empire for decades, Admiral. We know which worlds supply your food, which systems produce your weapons, which planets house your administrative centers. While you were focused on conquest, we were mapping every weakness in your civilization. The reports from across Zephyrian space painted a picture of coordinated devastation that defied conventional military thinking. Human forces weren't engaging in traditional space battles. Instead, they were systematically dismantling the foundation of imperial power with surgical precision. They're destroying the slave processing centers on Terminus, came another report. They freed over 1 million workers. The orbital refineries around Keplian are gone. The humans somehow disabled our defensive satellites without triggering our alert systems. Admiral, they're broadcasting surrender demands to every world in our empire. They're offering freedom to any planet that rebels against imperial authority. ZYXTRA felt the certainty of victory evaporating as he realized the scope of human planning. How many fleets do you have? Enough, Chen replied simply. Admiral, you made the mistake of thinking like a conqueror when you needed to think like a defender. You assumed we'd fight for our homeworld the same way every other species has fought for theirs. The human vessels and Sol system began moving, but not in the defensive patterns ZYXTRA expected. Instead, they spread out in formations clearly designed for mobility rather than protection. You brought 10 million ships to destroy Earth, Chen continued. We brought 50,000 ships to destroy your empire. Commander Veltar looked up from his tactical station in alarm. Admiral, the human ships are taking aggressive postures. They're not defending their world. They're preparing to attack us. With thousands against millions? ZYXTRA couldn't believe the tactical insanity he was witnessing. Not against millions, Chen corrected. Against one massive target that can't maneuver, can't retreat, and can't coordinate effectively because you concentrated everything in one place. The human attack began with weapons fire unlike anything in Zephyrian experience. Rather than attempting to destroy enemy ships directly, human weapons seemed designed to disable multiple vessels simultaneously. Electromagnetic pulse weapons knocked out electronics across entire formations, while exotic matter projectiles created chain reactions that spread through tightly packed Zephyrian squadrons. They're not trying to destroy us, ZYXTRA realized aloud. They're trying to create chaos. Very good, Admiral Chen approved. You're learning to think tactically. A panicked fleet of 10 million ships is far more dangerous to itself than to its enemies. As if to prove her point, collisions began occurring throughout the Zephyrian formation as disabled vessels drifted into their neighbors' paths. The sheer size of the fleet that had been their greatest advantage was becoming a massive liability. But the real shock came when human reinforcements began arriving. Not the hidden reserves Extra had expected, but ships jumping in from across the galaxy, carrying the spoils of their simultaneous attacks on Zephyrian territory. Admiral, Commander Veltar reported in amazement. The humans are transmitting video feeds from across our empire. They're showing us our own worlds falling in real time. The main display filled with images of human forces liberating Zephyrian slave worlds, destroying orbital installations, and systematically dismantling the infrastructure that had taken the Empire centuries to build. On world after world, the oppressed populations were rising up to join their human liberators. How is this possible? ZYXTRA whispered. Because we didn't come here to conquer your empire, Admiral, Chen explained. We came here to end it. Every world you've enslaved, every population you've oppressed, every species you've brutalized, they've all been waiting for someone to give them hope. The communication channels filled with transmissions from across Zephyrian space. Former slave worlds declaring independence. Conquered species joining human fleets. Entire star systems switching sides as the news of the Empire's vulnerability spread. You built your power on fear, Admiral Chen continued. The moment that fear was broken, your entire civilization began to collapse. Emperor Kralvex's voice cut through the chaos, transmitted from the Imperial homeworld that was clearly under siege. Admiral ZYXTRA, you will return to defend the capital immediately. If I leave Sol, the humans will destroy my entire fleet, ZYXTRA replied. If you don't return, the humans will destroy our entire empire, the Emperor responded. Admiral Chen's voice returned to the channel with an offer that struck at the heart of ZYXTRA's dilemma. Admiral, you have a choice. You can continue this pointless battle and watch your civilization burn, or you can surrender and help us build something better. Surrender? ZYXTRA's pride rebelled against the concept. Not to us, Chen clarified. To the species you've enslaved. To the worlds you've conquered. To the idea that strength should protect the weak instead of exploiting them. The tactical display updated to show human fleets across the galaxy, but now they were joined by vessels from dozens of liberated worlds. Former Zephyrian slave species were turning captured Imperial ships against their former masters. The rebellion was spreading faster than any military force could contain. This is what happens when you mistake fear for respect, Admiral Chen observed. The moment your subjects realized you could be defeated, they remembered how much they hated you. ZYXRA watched his empire crumble on every display around him. Centuries of conquest undone in hours by an enemy that had never tried to match Zephyrian strength, but had instead targeted Zephyrian weaknesses. "What do you want from us?" he finally asked. "The same thing we want from every species," Chen replied. "Learn to coexist instead of conquer. Use your strength to protect instead of oppress. Build instead of destroy." The Zephyrian admiral looked around his bridge at officers who had known only victory for their entire careers, now facing complete defeat at the hands of an enemy who seemed to understand warfare better than they understood themselves. "And if we refuse?" Admiral Chen's response carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Then you'll discover that humans are much better at destroying empires than you ever were at building them." As reports continued flooding in from across Zephyrian space, Admiral ZYXRA realized that the war was already over. The humans hadn't just defeated the Zephyrian Empire, they had convinced it to defeat itself. The species that had conquered 47 worlds in the name of strength had just learned what true strength looked like when wielded by those who understood the difference between power and wisdom. The Zephyrians had thought their empire was invincible. The humans had proven it was merely unsustainable. 6 months after the collapse of the Zephyrian Empire, Admiral Cathra stood in the observation deck of the human space station Unity, watching former slave worlds rebuild their civilizations under the protection of the newly formed Galactic Cooperation Council. The irony wasn't lost on him that the species he had once planned to conquer was now providing him sanctuary from the very empire he had served. The station itself was a marvel of human engineering, but more impressive was how it had been constructed. Rather than forcing their architectural preferences on other species, humans had created modular sections that could accommodate the environmental needs of dozens of different civilizations. It was cooperation on a scale that the conquest-focused Zephyrian Empire had never imagined possible. "Admiral," came a familiar voice behind him. He turned to see Admiral Sarah Chen approaching, wearing a simple uniform that bore no decorations or symbols of rank beyond small Earth insignia. Despite commanding the most powerful military force in known space, she looked more like a diplomat than a conqueror. "Admiral Chen," ZYXRA acknowledged formally. "I've reviewed the reconstruction proposals for the former Imperial worlds. Your species' generosity continues to surprise me." Chen joined him at the viewport, looking out at the busy space lanes where ships from dozens of species moved freely without the fear of Imperial taxation or conscription. "Generosity had nothing to do with it, Admiral. It was pure strategic thinking." ZYXRA's 4 eyes turned toward her with interest. Even after months of working with humans, he still struggled to understand their motivations. "Please explain." The Zephyrian Empire was powerful because it consumed everything it touched, Chen said thoughtfully. But consumption is ultimately self-limiting. Eventually, you run out of things to devour. Cooperation, on the other hand, creates exponential growth. She gestured toward a massive construction project visible in the distance. That shipyard is being built by former Zephyrian engineers, using designs created by liberated Kalari architects, with materials provided by grateful Nexari miners. Each species contributes what they do best, and the result is better than any single civilization could achieve alone. It was a concept that still challenged ZYXRA's fundamental understanding of power dynamics. But how do you maintain control? How do you ensure loyalty without fear? Admiral Chen smiled, the same expression that had once seemed so unsettling during their first confrontation. "Admiral, you're still thinking like a conqueror. We don't want control, and we don't want loyalty through fear." "Then what do you want?" "Partners," she replied simply. "Allies. Friends, if possible. The universe is a dangerous place, full of challenges that no single species can handle alone. Working together, we can accomplish things that would be impossible for any empire, no matter how powerful." Through the viewport, they watched as a human vessel docked alongside ships from 6 different species, their crews working together to transfer supplies to a former Zephyrian colony that was transitioning to independence. Your empire lasted 300 years, Chin continued. That's impressive by galactic standards. But it was always destined to fail because it was built on a flawed premise. Which premise? That strength comes from dominance over others, Chin explained. True strength comes from the ability to inspire others to stand beside you willingly. Zhuangzi considered this as he watched the cooperative efforts taking place throughout the system. The humans could have simply replaced the Zephyrian Empire with a human one. Your military superiority was clearly demonstrated. Why didn't you? Because we learned from our own history, Chin replied. Humanity spent millennia building empires, and every single one of them eventually collapsed. They all made the same mistake the Zephyrians made. They confused conquest with achievement. She activated a holographic display showing Earth's ancient history. We built empires that spanned continents, accumulated wealth beyond imagination, and commanded armies that seemed invincible. But they all fell, usually from internal conflicts caused by the very oppression they depended on for power. The display showed the rise and fall of civilizations across human history, each one following similar patterns of expansion, dominance, and eventual collapse. So when we finally reached the stars and discovered we weren't alone, Chen continued, we had a choice. We could repeat the same mistakes on a galactic scale, or we could try something different. The Cooperation Council, Zhuangzi observed. Exactly. Instead of conquering other species, we decided to learn from them. Instead of imposing our will, we chose to find common ground. It's harder than conquest, requires more patience, but the results speak for themselves. Zhuangzi looked around the station, noting the remarkable diversity of species working together in apparent harmony. It seems almost too peaceful. How do you handle conflicts between member species? Chen's expression grew more serious. We don't eliminate conflict, Admiral. We channel it constructively. When the Taraxians and the Vorthan had their territorial dispute last month, instead of letting them fight a war, we helped them negotiate a resource-sharing agreement that benefited both civilizations. And when negotiation fails, then we step in, Chen replied with quiet authority. But not as conquerors, as peacekeepers. The holographic display shifted to show recent human interventions in various conflicts. In each case, human forces had deployed not to defeat one side or the other, but to enforce ceasefires and protect civilians while diplomatic solutions were developed. This is still warfare, Zhuangzi observed. You're simply applying it differently. You're absolutely right, Chen agreed. We're still warriors, Admiral. We're still good at breaking things when necessary. The difference is that now we're equally good at building things. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. Chun activated her personal communicator, revealing the face of a young human officer. Admiral, we've received a response from the hegemony regarding our peace proposal, the officer reported. Zhuangzi's attention sharpened. The hegemony was a militaristic alliance that had emerged in the power vacuum left by the Zephyrian collapse. Early reports suggested they were attempting to rebuild the empire using many of the same oppressive tactics. What's their answer, Commander? Chen asked. They've rejected our offer and declared their intention to restore imperial rule over the former Zephyrian territories, the officer replied. They're demanding that all liberated worlds submit to hegemony authority within 30 days. Admiral Chun was quiet for a moment, and Zhuangzi found himself studying her expression. He had seen that look before, during their first confrontation. It was the expression of a predator that had just spotted prey. Admiral, Zhuangzi said carefully, you're going to war again, aren't you? Not war, Chen corrected. Education. She turned to face him directly, and for the first time since the Empire's collapse, Zhuangzi remembered why the Zephyrians had lost so completely to these deceptively peaceful-looking humans. Admiral, would you be interested in participating in a practical demonstration of why empires are a bad idea? Despite everything he had experienced, ZYXRA felt a chill at the casual way Chun delivered the offer. You want me to help you destroy the hegemony? I want you to help us teach them the same lesson we taught the Zephyrian Empire, Chun clarified. The universe works better when everyone cooperates willingly. She reactivated the holographic display, showing the tactical situation around hegemony space. The question is, would you rather be part of the solution or watch from the sidelines while we handle this ourselves? ZYXRA studied the display, noting the familiar patterns of imperial expansion that the hegemony was following. They were making the same mistakes, using the same tactics, and apparently expecting different results. What role would I play? He asked. The same role you played in the reconstruction effort, Chun replied. Advisor, translator, and proof that former enemies can become allies when they choose cooperation over conquest. The former Zephyrian admiral considered the offer carefully. 6 months ago, he had been a proud conqueror, serving an empire that seemed destined to rule the galaxy. Now he was being asked to help prevent another species from making the same catastrophic mistakes. The hegemony won't surrender as easily as we did, he warned. Their leadership is younger, more aggressive. They believe they can succeed where the Zephyrian Empire failed. Let them believe it, Chun replied calmly. Overconfidence makes excellent fertilizer for humility. ZYXRA looked out at the peaceful scene beyond the viewport, then back at the tactical displays showing the growing threat of hegemony expansion. The choice was clear, even if it would have been incomprehensible to his former imperial mindset. When do we begin? He asked. Admiral Chun smiled, and this time ZYXRA understood exactly what that expression meant. It wasn't cruelty or bloodthirst. It was the quiet confidence of someone who had studied the art of war so thoroughly that victory was simply a matter of proper application. We've already begun, she replied. The first hegemony worlds should be declaring independence within the week. How is that possible? They haven't even received your ultimatum yet. Admiral, Chun said patiently, you're still thinking like a conqueror. We don't send ultimatums to empires. She gestured toward the viewport, where representatives from dozens of liberated worlds were working together in peaceful cooperation. We send invitations. As if summoned by her words, the communication system activated with incoming transmissions from across the galaxy. Reports of hegemony-controlled worlds requesting membership in the Cooperation Council. Intelligence about hegemony military positions provided by their own oppressed subjects. Offers of assistance from former imperial species who had learned to prefer freedom over security. You see, Admiral Chun explained as the reports continued flowing in, the hegemony is trying to rebuild an empire in a galaxy that has already learned there's a better way. ZYXRA watched the real-time collapse of hegemony authority with something approaching awe. You're not going to fight them at all, are you? Why fight an empire when you can convince it to dissolve itself? Chun replied, Admiral, the age of conquest is over. It ended the moment the first Zephyrian slave world saw that freedom was possible. Outside the viewport, the galaxy continued its ancient dance, but now that dance included the voices of dozens of species working together toward common goals. The Zephyrian Empire had sought to impose order through force and had created only resentment and rebellion. The humans had offered cooperation freely and had created something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization based on choice rather than compulsion. As ZYXRA watched another former hegemony world join the growing alliance of free species, he finally understood what Admiral Chun had tried to tell him months ago. The humans hadn't won because they were better at war than everyone else. They had won because they were better at peace. And in a galaxy that had known too much war for too long, that made them the most powerful force in the universe.